Appreciate this opportunity today. I'm talking today about the Great Food Reset. That's my name. I used to work in the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. I was also Rush Limbaugh's man in Washington. I was his TV show reporter back for his TV show from 1992 to 1996. I had the website Climate Depot, and of course, next, that's my book, which is available here in the back. And please take an extra copy. Get this out. This is one of the most important issues facing America now. And today I'm going to just focus on the food angle. What's essentially happening is what's happening globally, we're watching, they're collapsing our energy supply, they're collapsing our food supply, they're collapsing our transportation with the mandates, they're collapsing our First Amendment rights. And going back to the 1930s, which I'll show a slide here in a second, they're literally collapsing all this to say, hey, look, the market failed. Now we need to nationalize all this, and we need to take away even more freedom because it all failed, even though they're intentionally collapsing it. So go next. So this is the World Economic Forum. They loved COVID lockdowns so much, and this includes climate activists, World Economic Forum, UN climate chiefs, that right after it happened, this is June of 2020, the head of the World Economic Forum said, the pandemic represents a narrow window to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world, to reset capitalism, to reset the existing order. So in other words, they wanted to keep the world collapsing from COVID lockdowns and rebuild it in their image. And that's what we're going to talk about, what they want to rebuild. Go ahead, next. This is the actual slides. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Next. Meat will be permitted only as an occasional treat, not necessarily at the Davos forums. They're not talking about that. They're talking about you here. An occasional treat where meat, not a staple, for the good of the environment and our health. Remember, they're doing it for your own good, so don't get mad. It's for your own good. It's like a child being mad at their parent. Biden is all in on this. Expect real food shortages. Now, they're trying to blame this all on the Ukraine war, which, of course, has exacerbated it, all the sanctions, which have hurt Americans more than they've hurt Russia, but that's another story. Next. The USAID chief actually declared that catastrophic food and fertilizer are hastening the transition to this net zero climate goals and the new farming techniques. Never let a crisis go to waste. That's what the actual quote is from the head of that. Next. The EU is telling Africa they need to stop buying Russian fertilizer, even though they can't make the fertilizer themselves, because fertilizer production in Africa, this is according to EU. How many people thought colonialism died with the 19th century? Fertilizer production in Africa would clash with EU green goals. This is according to the Reuters news agency reporting with the EU. In other words, Africa, you can't get up off your feet, you can't feed your people, because we have climate goals here in the wealthy Western white world. The people of color in the developing world have to follow. This is where we are in the year 2022. Next. The collapse of energy, food, transportation calls for nationalization. This is, next, I'll show you, this is Roosevelt's top advisor, kitchen cabinet advisor. This is Stuart Chase. This is 1932, but 1940, he wrote a 1942 book. And it says here, he envisioned the control of banking, security and exchange by the government, control of energy by the government, control of transportation, railway, highway by the government, control of agricultural production by the government. Remember, every time there's a shortage created by government policies, it's the failure of the market system. We need to do more of what caused that and put the government in charge. Roosevelt's top economic advisor asked at the end of his book, why should the Soviets have all the fun remaking the world? This is 1932. Now, if you recall, this is when the New York Times was gloating about Stalin's purges in Ukraine with his agricultural revolution. And I've updated that. The 2022 motto for the Great Reset crowd is, why should China have all the fun remaking the world? So let's go next. China buying up American farmland. Just one note, if you remember the old debates, Al Gore debated Ross Perot, and I remember at the time, it probably splits people in this room. The free market trade versus, protectionism or tariffs. All the think tanks in Washington were for the free market. And the argument was advanced in the 1990s and pushed even by the Clinton administration throughout that time, and probably the Republican Congress, as best as I can remember. The more we enrich China and open up trade and China gets wealthier, they'll become more like us. They'll become a free society. They'll drop their totalitarianism. Well, I think we can safely report in 2022 that China didn't become like us. The once free West is becoming like China, and they gutted our industrial base, moved jobs to China, India, and this is where we are. And now they're coming for agricultural land. This is, according to Politico magazine, current trend is leading us toward the creation of a Chinese-owned agricultural land monopoly. Next. China lacks the farmland, so it struggled to feed its 1.4. So they're even purchasing food processors, Smithfield Foods, grain logistics. So they're buying key things. Now, it's only 3% of American farmland is foreign owned. So don't panic yet, but this is where it's headed, and this could change rapidly. The more we have climate policies, net zero, the more collapse, the more fertilizer shortages. Family-run, generational farms, smaller, medium-sized farms go under. Who's there to buy it up? Equity asset, billionaires, and China. Next. Bill Gates. This is People magazine. I love citing mainstream news sources. This isn't some obscure blog. People magazine. Bill Gates becomes the largest farmland owner in the United States. Now, we all like competition, so we don't have to worry about a Chinese farmland monopoly because Bill Gates is competing with him. And American know-how. Bill Gates is beating China. Question really is, who do we want to root for? Do you want China or Bill Gates? I don't know. In some ways, it might be easier to expel China one day. It's much harder to deal with Bill Gates, given his influence. $300 million to get favorable media for all of his public health and climate things. He pays the media. You've never seen Bill Gates in a hostile media interview. It's not possible. All the reporters are literally in his take, from PBS to NPR. All right, next. Next. Bill Gates, America's largest farm. This is according to NBC News, another mainstream source. The billionaire couple, Gates and his wife Melinda, in less than a decade have accumulated 269,000 acres across 18 states. Young farmers are going up against billionaire investors. Who can compete with the likes of Bill Gates? Now think about it. The lockdowns, we had people talking about that in the previous panel. Biggest transfer of wealth from poor middle class to the wealthy. I have a whole chapter devoted to lockdown, how lockdowns kill and how they transfer wealth to upwards, and how they are one of the greatest tools of the Great Reset. Emergency powers are one of the greatest tools. And we're still under a 9/11 emergency terrorist power. We're still under the COVID emergency power. And now Biden wants to add to that a climate emergency, a climate emergency declaration, which may come in November, according to Associated Press, Washington Post. Give them 130 new presidential powers, give mayors, governors, they'll be able to go more after agriculture, more after fertilizer, more after transportation. They don't need no stinking democracy anymore. That's the problem here. Next. And that's stop big pharma. Anyway, Bill Gates, America's largest farmland owner. He's not the one in overalls. I like where NBC News reports the obvious. He's not the one on the tractor. We didn't expect him to be. He's literally buying up distressed farmland. Next. That's some of the holdings. I don't believe Missouri's on it. Or this may have been from, I think it's 2021 or 2020. So I don't think he's bought anything yet in Missouri, although this is a little old because I know the number's gone up on that. But that's where he's buying land. The latest, of course, is North Dakota. It's also near a U.S. military installation. The town sold it to him, and there's a big dispute about China, getting this foothold. So next. So when you have China, Bill Gates, what is Gates' agenda? Why would he want to start accumulating all this farmland? Besides an ego, a billionaire saying, I'm the single largest farmland owner in the U.S. No one else, I own more than any other entity. So rich nations should shift to synthetic beef. That's Bill Gates' agenda. Keep in mind, I'm not talking about the Impossible Burger, the vegetable oil processed. I'm talking about lab-grown meat. So let's see what Bill Gates is talking about next. Well, he's talking about this is test tube steak. Rich countries should move to 100% synthetic beef. This went from millions in investment to now billions a year into this lab-grown meat. Go next. Now, what they do, just so you have an idea of what Bill Gates is pushing as America's, because he's going to have great sway over farmland policy, agricultural policy. They pull stem cells from a cow. They get the fetal blood from an unborn cow. They mix it in a lab. It takes months. They add a bunch of things. It has no immune system. It's technically animal product, but it looks like an invasion of the body snatcher's pod. It doesn't look like an animal. It's sort of mutated muscle growing. It's like a blob growing in labs, and the scientists have to come in and preen and primp it every day. Then when they're done with that, they get a 3D printer. Go next. and they get a 3D printer. This is what the World Economic Forum, home of the Great Reset. Fake meat from a printer. Machines can print up to 6 kilograms of meat an hour. So you buy this, you're going to get printed meat. They're going to have food dye. It's going to have the right texture. They can make it around. They can adjust the cholesterol level, the fat level, the protein level. It's all completely engineered. You don't have to think of a thing, and you don't need farms with animals on it anymore. It's all going to be done in a lab. That's the vision. So how many here like that vision? Would you eat it? I mean, okay. And hey, honey, what's for dinner tonight? Hey, I'm printing up some steaks on the printer. It'll be ready in about 3 minutes. We need a new cartridge. Darn, we're out of ink. Okay, next. Gore is also involved in this. Gore has a quest to become the world's first fake meat billionaire. Of course, he's doing the vegetable processed oil that they're pushing at Burger King, McDonald's, and apparently the fast food chains. The sales have just sunk to nothing. Apparently, it causes, with all these vegetable oils, a lot of gas issues, is all I'll say there. But Bill, he had one of the biggest IPOs ever on this, and then, of course, these stocks are tanking. So Al Gore may not get that another pile of cash. He went from $2 million net worth after he left the vice presidency to $100 million 10 years later. Then he sells Al Jazeera. I mean, he's worth $500 million. I mean, this man has never been, no one is a more enriched fossil fuel player in the climate debate than Al Gore, having sold his network to Al Jazeera. So next. The global green energy push is causing a fertilizer shortage and threatening human food supply. It's not just in sanctions. It's nothing. I mean, it has something to do with Russia that makes it worse. But this has been growing for a while. There's a war. The United Nations did an agriculture report, 2019, and they did one in 2007 saying that cow emissions are greater than all the transportation sector. We need to stop this in food production. So they're going after nitrogen fertilizer because it creates nitrous oxide, which they claim is this horrible greenhouse gas agent, although scientists are now publishing studies saying that's not even true if you're worried about climate change. But they're using that as an excuse as part of this net zero. Next. Sri Lanka. Now, we were talking about ESG. Derek was talking about it. They had a perfect, near perfect, 98 ESG score, higher than Sweden at 96. The USA were only at 51. The article on the left was 2018. The Sri Lankan prime minister decided to go all organic. They were going to mandate it, get rid of all modern agriculture, any fertilizer. They're going to just go organic. It's going to be strict. And he predicted he'll make the country rich by 2025. Well, he made himself rich. He fled the country in 2022. That article is no longer available because Sri Lanka collapsed due to food shortages. The citizens overran the presidential palace, swam in the swimming pool. Talk about an insurrection. That's it from these climate policies. They gutted the country agriculturally. Next. Canada is now in the process of collapsing high-yield farming. Less fertilizer, less food. Trudeau is now joining with what's happening in the Netherlands. And many Canadian provinces, just like we're hearing from Derek about state treasurers and state financial officers, they're fighting back. They're calling it Trudeau's starvation policy. This is from the Canadian provinces banding together. Next. Biologists, this is in Australia, they're following the same thing, decimate farming. So it's a global phenomenon. It's a foreign invasion of this ideology of climate and the idea that we can no longer manage our own food supply. We have to have edicts top down from above, and they're going to go after it. Like, so I think it was Derek just said, Europe is about 5 years ahead of us with the green insanity, which means it's coming here. California is ahead of the US. They're probably about only a year or two behind Europe. Next. But here's the thing, even like what happened in Sri Lanka, even if you believed that all this was organic was the way to go, and then there's already people saying it wasn't done correctly in Sri Lanka, just like Stalin didn't do communism correctly, just like Venezuela didn't do socialism correctly, just like Eastern Europe, just like, this is Jerome Adams, Deborah Birx, they'll say, we never really were locked down. That wasn't a lockdown. They love to change definition. Well, now they're saying that if you actually look at the science behind this organic farming, vegetarian diets worse for the climate, 3 times more harmful. Organic farming makes the climate worse because it increases carbon emissions per acre. The problem is you don't get the yield per acre, which means you have a threat to animals, a threat to trees. Nothing against organic farming, but you can't have top-down mandates, and you can't ban modern agriculture to go back to mandate organic. And that's what Sri Lanka found out, and that's what's going to happen in Europe right now, we're finding next. So the New York Times appraising all of this collapse of our modern agriculture. Why? Inflation is a way to adjust what we eat. This actually appeared in the New York Times. This was a couple months ago. The lifestyle journalist actually said it has the potential to drive welcome change. We could adjust what we eat to save our pocketbooks and our planet. You want to buy meat in this economy? So the idea is they'd love it if you go get, like same thing that Martha's Vineyards residents fed the 50 illegal immigrants from Venezuela. I think it was, what kind of cereal was it? Was it Fruit Loops? Yeah. Processed food, it's much better for the environment. Do not eat the meat. That's bad. All right, next. Nature, this is the journal Nature, eat less meat. This is what I was telling you. The United Nations Climate Change Report actually called for this changes to human diet. So then inflation comes up, then people can't buy it. Netherlands, where they're collapsing the agriculture, up to 12,000 family-run small, medium farms owned by the same families for generations are going to be forced shut. That's why they're shutting down the Netherlands with tractors and throwing manure at the city hall. Because they don't want to go, they're not going to do this. And what do you think is going to happen to those farms? Equity asset, possibly China, Bill Gates. Americans may have to say goodbye to steak and burgers as beef cost rises. So you see what happens? The UN comes up with a goal. The UN then has these countries sign on to it. And we never voted for this. We didn't vote to end gas-powered cars. We didn't vote for vax mandates. We didn't vote for lockdowns. We didn't vote to close churches. We didn't vote to end meat eating. But that's how the Great Reset works. It takes democracy away from you, and they do it behind the scenes, much the way ESG is working behind the scenes. Next. UK environmental activist. This is George Monbiot. He's a key advisor to Greta Thunberg. Shut down animal farming altogether, one of the greatest causes of climate breakdown. And I love the next one. Go to the next one. This is the same guy, Monbiot. Beef is like a loaded gun pointed at the living world. What's for dinner tonight? Are we having pointed guns? Or okay, yeah. All right, next. Meat patch. This is actually an NYU professor came up with this idea. Now companies are doing it. It's a nicotine-style meat patch. So if you can afford the meat, and if you still want to do it despite all the environmental destruction, and you just can't help yourself from eating it, you can get this little meat patch that makes you nauseous if you eat any meat. So next. Farmers are being bankrupted. Russell Brand, I urge you to listen to him. He's a former Hollywood celebrity, socialist activist. He has come around. Almost all his videos on YouTube rail against the Great Reset. All right, next. Climate policy caused food shortages, not climate change. All right, next. And this is a great summation. In the Netherlands, the state is closing 11,200 farms. Stalin and Mao seized farmland. I always told you it was climate communism. That's a Swedish journalist on the ground. All right, and I guess I'll finish up. But the next thing they're pushing is insect eating, World Economic Forum. Next. Cockroach milk is the protein drink you didn't know you've been missing. How many didn't know that? Next. And then this is all just World Economic Forum, mainstream media, scientific journals. They really want you to start eating insects. That's really what they're pushing. Next. That's to replace meat. 5 reasons why insects could change it. World Economic Forum. Just look at all these returns. Every article, every day. Next. And the great school kids, thousands of school districts in Australia getting cricket-based snacks. Kids are told to go home and pester their parents. Next. Don't let them make don't let fake meat worm its way into your food. Next. So this is also beer made from urine that could help water shortages. Did you know that? Farmers are using up all the water, so hey, we have to drink. Yeah. So, okay. All right, sorry, keep going. Anyway, and your pee is a pollution problem. That's according to Scientific American. All right, let's just finish this up. So stop the land grab. Biden's trying to push this. Next. And it's 30 by 30. This is by the year 2030. They're going to take over more land and try to control natural resources management. And I'll end on the next one. Go one more. Owning something, this is according to the United Nations. This is what's behind all this. United Nations Conference in Vancouver. Land can't be treated as an ordinary asset. It's a principal instrument of concentration of wealth, therefore contributes to social injustice. So that's what's happening here. They're going after private property. They're going after it with cars. They're going after it with farmland. And so with that, as part of this whole Great Reset, we didn't vote for any of this. It's the same model as the ESG, and it's working as all these corporations collude with government. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark.